Welcome to Duncan Thorin Shield's YouTube channel. I managed to con Duncan into convincing his friend to pay me thousands and thousands of dollars as a professional Counter-Strike player, so maybe he can convince you that some of his analysis is correct.
Ring rust is a term that describes a concept that I think is quite relevant, quite valid in the context of competing in esports, specifically as a competitive professional level player in real official matches, in stage settings against other top pros, but it often goes missed. Like, people who haven't been competitors don't understand it. Often the competitors in esports are much younger anyway, sometimes teenagers, or at least they start at that age, and therefore they won't be aware of these things because they don't have the same experienced teammates and pros and coaches that the more traditional sports athletes have to explain this kind of concept to them. Because I've seen it. I'll explain some examples first and then go into the concept. Across multiple games you can see this, but I'll use CSGO and League of Legends as my two main games at the moment to give the illustration. So in CSGO, the dominant team last year, 2018, was the Danish team Astralis. They were unbelievably dominant. Their era, their period of dominance even stretched into this year. They won the Major. They won a Blast after that. The problem is, after they won the Blast Sao Paulo event, they didn't win a single tournament after that. They made one final in another Blast, and they only made one additional top four finish. And this is out of 5 tournaments we're talking about. Before that time period, they were a team that once they reached number one, like more than a year earlier, well, around a year earlier, they'd never gone 2 events without winning a title. So even if they didn't win an event, they just came right back and won the next one. Now they're having 5 events where they didn't win a single event and they're only in one final. So you see the massive difference. Well, what happened? I can tell you. They stopped going to the big events. They mainly went to smaller events in terms of the format. You played less games. You perhaps... question was whether you played less opponents overall. You played less matches against them, less maps of play. Most of the games weren't huge stage matches in the same way with the same attention on them because best of ones were all played at the same time. Go and look at another CSGO example. If you go way back to the beginning of CSGO, when the Very Games team, who was very successful in Source, brought their core over to CSGO, they were the clear second best team. Famously, they lost to NIP in 4 straight finals. And then what happened was a player called RPK retired from CS. He said, don't want to play anymore. And then 2 years later, he came back to play with a similar core of players in a team called Titan, basically the rebranded Very Games at that point in time. Now, the key thing to understand is, when he was in Very Games at the beginning of CSGO, he was one of Very Games' best players. He was actually one of the better CSGO players in general. He had been one of the greatest Source players ever. A lot of people consider him the prime contender for greatest of all time status, the equivalent to the Neo Forest. They're the 1.6 greats over in CSGO, CS Source rather. But when he came back, despite being good in early CSGO, after 2 years away from the game, even with lots of practice, for the whole first year he came back, he was basically a bomb relative to his old self and where he used to be, and the other top pros. Like, he was just dead weight a lot of the time. He was just a very average fragger. He didn't have very good game sense. And famously, as I've revealed many times, his in-game leader, I've actually heard the comms, used to literally have to basically micro him around the map, like tell him everywhere to go, what to do, and what to do next, because he just didn't have a feel for the game. He didn't understand the game. His skills were completely decayed. In League of Legends, I've got 2 great examples for you. One of my favourite players, Forgiven, the Greek AD carry, monster lane dominant player, came back to League of Legends after having been retired for like around a year or so. And he came to play in the EU Masters, the level below the LCS level. And he played on Origin with Froggen and Expect, in Insec, a bunch of different players. And when he came back, he was far from the dominant lane presence that he used to be. He was far from the masterful AD carry that he used to be. Quite frankly, even though he did all right and he had some good games, there were some he was actually like borderline embarrassing for his standard in, even though, yes, obviously he wasn't trying to be a pro player again. And quite frankly, in terms of winning the tournament, he got carried by Froggen and Expect, the mid laner and the top laner. It's just that his rep and winning the tournament meant people kind of wanted to state that like he was just as good as he ever was. He wasn't. Then you look at a very recent example, again, I'm trying to go past and present here, would be Prey, legendary AD carry, one of the greatest AD carries, one of the greatest players to ever play League of Legends, or probably any MOBA in general, went from being incredibly consistent, superlative levels. Even when Kingzone was failing, he was often a very good part of Kingzone, one of the few shining lights. When he retired at the end of Season 8, after obviously the breakup of the Kingzone team, he chose not to sign with KT Roaster and he retired. So in Spring Split, he was just retired, he was gone. KT Roaster floundered without him. They had a lot of troubles. And so they brought him back in the summer. After MSI, Korea didn't win Worlds. Like, the joke was, you know, everyone's praying that he comes back. And of course, Prey came back. He came back to KT Roaster where they had this big lineup of big names. He's just been average, quite frankly. He went from being one of the best ever with real consistency, an unbelievable career, such decorated successes, such an incredible, like the eye test told he was a really polished player, very well-rounded, great understanding of the game. He came back, he's just all right. He's just an all right player at best. Nothing special entirely. So ring rust, let's see how this applies. The concept comes from combat sports. I think boxing, kickboxing. In more recent times, obviously, it's more famed from MMA, mixed martial arts. The premise is that when you haven't been in the ring for an official bout, in this case, a bout, perhaps even with the equivalent of a stage setup for them would be have a crowd, right? Have a big crowd, have a TV audience, have all this fanfare around you. When you haven't had one of those real matches for a while, you get rusty. Your skills decay. Your timing's not as good. Your speed drops off a bit. Your mental focus isn't there. Your stamina in terms of raw, like cardio might not even show itself. But it's not about lack of practice or poor work ethic. You could have put in a massive training camp before. You could have been training 2-3 months before. The point is, doesn't matter what setup you have, most people will face ring rust. And part of it is you can't practice to properly simulate or replicate the environment of an actual fight. Having the crowd around you, having the TV attention, having the build up to the fight, sitting in the dressing room watching the other fights, thinking about your fight and what it means for your career and what a win will do and where the loss will put you down, and then your family's there and your teammates there. That's not going to happen when you're in practice. You won't have those same pressures. You won't have your mind constrained in the same way. You won't burn off nervous energy in a locker room the same way. If you're just in a gym working, you can be doing loads of rounds and sparring, doing full 5-round fights, going the full distance, your cardio's looking great, they're hitting the speed bag, your techniques are all there, everyone's saying from practice, oh, he's fully back. But you won't be at that same level when you're in the ring. It almost never happens. It has on a few occasions, people can overcome it. Maybe some of the greatest of all time, in which case we don't even know how much of their reserves they were kind of tapping in terms of greatness. But in terms of normal fighters, this is a real problem. Even the best practice only kind of works to replicate some of these elements. That's why in combat sports, what they do is there's this term, a tune-up fight. It's like you tune up a car. The idea is when you come back and you were a top contender, a champion, a legend, you come back, they don't just throw you in there at the level you were at when you left. If you're the champion, they don't just immediately necessarily give you the next champion fight. They do, sadly, nowadays in MMA because it's all about money. They don't chuck a contender straight back in there. You'd get eaten alive by the current crop you pays. They're all living that life. You're just a tourist at this point in time trying to get back into that life. No, you give them a lesser fight against a newer guy, an unproven guy himself doesn't have much experience, and you give you a chance to kind of work out the wrinkles, get that kind of form back, get the consistency back, get the feel of competing back again, and then you go into the actual concept. Now, this even ties in, I think, conceptually, to why comebacks so often fail in esports, because typically they fail because when someone quit, they had a good reason to quit and they haven't reconciled what that reason was or really understood it or the more reasons behind why they felt a certain way. So it might be that they just weren't good enough at the game anymore, in which case if you come back, guess what? You're probably not going to be good at the game with even less practice and a load of ring rust. They maybe got burned out. Maybe it's just too much from the stress. Well, when you come back, yeah, of course you feel great now. You've had time off. You've relieved the pressure. But when you come back and the stress starts again, maybe you're going to second guess yourself. Probably lost motivation, right? Well, if you lose motivation again, you might go away, have a fun time and think, yeah, I could get into playing that for a bit. But you might only be motivated for a week. That's the problem. You have to be motivated 6 months, a year if you're going to be a pro player. So what tends to happen is you either come back and find similar circumstances present themselves, or it's just way too much effort to go all the way back to the top. And hence why when you quit, you thought, fuck it, this is a good deal to quit. The problem here is that players themselves, fighters, until they experience this, unless they have good coaching staff, will often be in denial that this concept even exists. In fact, players generally have a big time problem evaluating their level. So they often think that wherever their peak was individually as a player or success-wise, status-wise, that they should always be there and that at any moment it's attainable to go right back to that. Whether they've just come back, whether they're on a lesser team, whether they've been out of form for months and months, they always think they can go straight back to that. Consider your own play if you play League of Legends and solo queue, play matchmaking in CSGO. If you take even a month off and don't play the game at all and you come back, of course, you're going to say that famous line, aren't you, when you play your first game? Ah, well, first game, who cares? Just a warm-up game, isn't it? No, I thought you could get straight back to your level. it's so unlikely you'll beat a level. Your mind knows what you want to do. You think in the similar way, if you're lucky. You haven't been away for too long. It's just a month. But your body can't do it properly. You don't have the routine down, the rhythm down. You maybe don't even have the basic dexterity because you've let some of the kind of macros of how your fingers work and things that just happen, the chaining of little small movements and details and actions that you don't even have to think about when you're in the game, in the floor, you've played a lot, you're at your peak level. This isn't the same as ring rust, but you can see the principle. It can work even on the amateur level. That's why when I made that video about mechanics and a StarCraft and League concept, that's the concept. It wasn't just about speed, it was about the smoothness, the execution. How like if you see Faker play, his speed is incredible, but he doesn't have any wasted movements. There are any extra keys pressed. He doesn't press like them 3 or 4 times preemptively at double if does to like queue it up. No, he seems to just press them at exactly the right time because his timing's there, his pacing's there. He's got like the stamina to know exactly when to do this, to maintain it. He knows every aspect of it. He doesn't let himself get in a ring rust state. You look at players, I think you look in League of Legends or CSGO, there are players who epitomizes Froggen in League of Legends. So smooth, so silky, the execution's flawless, but you never think, God, his APM's insane. But he never seems like he's lacking for it, right? Same with Kolja G. Doesn't even have close to the best aim, but he looks polished as fuck. It always looks like there's time for him to set up the shot, to execute the shot, to move to the next kill. No one can ever somehow like bomb rush him from both sides. He always gets one and then queues up the other and knows the timing and how to offset the disadvantage that he's in, etc. This is the problem. All of these things, yes, there's a physical component, but it's the way the mind, the thing that pilots the body, that allows you to succeed. It's the way that enters the ring, enters competition again, that is affected primarily by ring rust. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, NateDOhDoubleG, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Wendelful, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Daniel Olivar, Chi Mao, JDubs, Kolja G, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion and weixz. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers or who the guests are for my upcoming videos? Maybe you want to take part in a monthly donate a discussion with me. Well, all of these perks and more are available at the Patreon link in the description box below.